His fingers closed around her wrist like she was a door handle, right there at the host stand, in a restaurant full of people who suddenly found the floor very interesting. She didn't flinch. She didn't cry out. She went still the way a woman goes still when she has survived enough to know the difference between a moment and a war. But at the back table, tucked behind frosted glass and a barely touched glass of scotch, the most feared man in Chicago set down his drink with 2 fingers, and his eyes said something that needed no translation. Someone in this room just made the last mistake of their normal life. Let's go back to where this actually begins. Her name is Amara, 31 years old, raised in Gary, Indiana, which is the kind of city that teaches you one of 2 things, how to leave or how to survive not leaving. Amara learned both. She started in food service at 15, rolling silverware into cloth napkins at a steakhouse that smelled like old money and onion rings. She bussed tables, she prepped, she stayed after closing to mop floors that nobody else would touch. She never complained about a single task, because she understood something most people don't figure out until it's too late. That mastery is invisible until the moment it becomes undeniable. By 31, she was front-of-house director at Caldwell and Thorne, a flagship restaurant in Chicago's Gold Coast neighborhood where the tasting menu ran 14 courses and a wine pairing cost more than most people's car payments. The kind of place where aldermen celebrated birthdays in private dining rooms and tech executives flew in specifically for the black truffle risotto. The kind of place that ran on precision and reputation, and the quiet, invisible labor of a woman who made sure every single moving part landed exactly where it needed to. The man who owned it, executive chef and managing partner Elliot Marsh, despised her for it. Not publicly. Elliot was too calculated for that. 56 years old, jaw like a magazine cover, accent imported from a London childhood he referenced constantly, 5 nationally recognized restaurant concepts, a memoir that charmed its way onto bestseller lists, and the particular arrogance of a man who has spent decades being told his talent justifies everything else about him. Elliot didn't dislike Amara because she failed. He disliked her because the restaurant succeeded when she was on the floor and noticeably wobbled when she wasn't, and the staff knew it, and the regulars knew it, and Elliot knew it most of all. Every great chef needs a spine. The problem with spines is they hold everything up without ever getting the credit. That Thursday in March, Elliot was the kind of wound-up that makes kitchens dangerous. A James Beard nomination he'd been counting on had gone to someone else, someone younger, and the sting of it had been working through him since morning like a slow poison. He'd been snapping at his sous chefs, sending back plates with non-existent flaws, moving through the kitchen like a storm system looking for land to ruin. Amara was at the host stand reviewing table assignments for a private event when he came up behind her. She heard him a half-second too late. He grabbed her wrist, twisted her arm slightly as he pulled her toward him, turning her body to face the dining room like he was repositioning a display item. "Table 7's flowers are wilting," he said, like his hand wasn't wrapped around her wrist, like the rotation of her body had been a professional consultation rather than physical force. "You're making us look sloppy in our own room." The dining room went quiet in that specific, practiced way that rooms go quiet when something unacceptable happens and everyone decides simultaneously to become very absorbed in whatever is directly in front of them. A server near the bar window looked at the bottles. A bartender polished the same glass for the next 30 seconds. 4 tables of guests became deeply invested in their bread. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Because Elliot Marsh was the name above the door, and names above doors have always been able to do things to the people walking underneath them. Amara's jaw set. Her voice came out the way a river comes out during a drought, steady, controlled, but you could hear the depth of what was underneath. "Let go of my arm, Elliot." He held on for precisely long enough to make the release feel like his idea. Then he dropped her wrist, adjusted his jacket, and walked back to the kitchen like the last 60 seconds had happened to someone else. Amara straightened, picked up her clipboard, made a note to replace the flowers at table 7. And in the back corner of the room, a man named Park Jin-soo placed both palms flat on the table in front of him, and the woman sitting across from him, his associate, not his date, recognized the gesture and looked away, because the last time she'd seen both his hands go flat like that, a lone operation in Pilsen that had been running for 9 years ceased to exist by the following weekend. If something in you just went tight, hold on. This story was built for the people who feel it and can't explain why. Afro-Korean Tales doesn't chase views. We chase the stories that live in you long after they're over. Subscribe right now, because when this man stands up from that table, Elliot Marsh's entire constructed world begins to come apart at the seams, and you're going to want to watch every brick fall. Amara made it to the walk-in cooler at 11:53 that night because it was the only room in the building with a door she could lock from the inside. She stood between shelves of vacuum-sealed proteins and let her hands shake. Not on the floor. Never on the floor. She had given Elliot exactly nothing during service. No tears, no flinch, no visible fracture. But alone in the cold white hum of the refrigeration unit, she allowed herself to feel the size of what had happened. She'd been here before. Not this cooler. This moment. The knowledge that something was witnessed and that by morning, what was witnessed would have been quietly renegotiated in people's memories. He tapped her. He gestured. You know how Elliot gets when he's stressed. She knew this script. She had watched it performed in every professional environment where a woman's account of her own experience becomes less credible the moment a powerful man's comfort is on the table. Her mother called. Somehow she always called. Hey, Mama, you sound tight. Long night. What happened? Nothing I'm not going to handle. The silence on the other end had a specific texture that meant her mother didn't believe her and loved her enough not to push. She went home, didn't sleep. By 5:30 in the morning, she was at her kitchen table writing an incident report with the kind of cold precision that strips everything human out of an account and leaves only the verifiable. Time, location, physical description of contact, list of individuals present. Emotion is the first thing discredited. Dates and dimensions survive. She sent it to the restaurant's parent company, a hospitality group headquartered in River North she'd never once been asked to meet with in person. The response came in 3 hours and 40 minutes. We take all concerns seriously and will conduct a thorough review. In the meantime, please maintain your standard responsibilities. Standard responsibilities. Walk back into the building where a man put his hands on your body and act like the floor hasn't shifted. She went to work that evening because dignity doesn't defer the rent. He was there again. Same table, same scotch, different quality of attention. Amara noticed him this time. Korean, she guessed early 40s, with the kind of face that had clearly decided a long time ago that expression was an expenditure to be budgeted. He wore a dark suit that looked personally installed rather than purchased. His hands rested on the table with a stillness that didn't match the energy of the room around him. The woman who'd been with him the night before was gone. In her place sat a large, quiet man who hadn't touched the water glass in front of him and was watching the room the way a chess player watches a board mid-game. She approached because it was her job. Good evening, welcome back to Caldwell and Thorne, she said. He looked at her, not past her at her with the full, unhurried weight of someone who treats attention like a decision. The service here is impeccable, he said. That's your doing, not the kitchen's. She paused. That was too specific to be flattery. That was observation. He came back the next night, and the one after, same corner, same order, same quality of watching everything and appearing to watch nothing. By the 4th visit, Amara understood this man had not come for the food. By the 5th, she understood she was the reason he kept returning. And that understanding settled into her chest, like something she needed to examine carefully before she decided what to do with it. On that 5th night, Elliot emerged from the kitchen on one of his floor tour, the performance he did for VIP tables, where he played magnanimous host rather than the man who'd been screaming at line cooks 30 minutes earlier. He passed the corner table, sized up Park Jin-soo with the reflexive dismissal of a man who measures other men by surface-level signals, and filed him away under irrelevant. That miscalculation would cost Elliot Marsh everything he'd spent 2 decades building, within the span of 8 weeks. The internal investigation concluded on a Tuesday. The finding: insufficient evidence to substantiate the complaint. The 2 servers who'd been standing close enough to hear Elliot's voice had independently experienced sudden uncertainty about the details of what they'd observed. The bartender couldn't recall the specifics. The security camera positioned above the host stand had suffered a system error that apparently corrupted the relevant window of footage. 41 minutes gone. Amara read the email in her car in the parking structure. Rain on the windshield. Hands flat on the steering wheel because she had trained her hands to stay flat. She called her college friend Priya, now a civil litigation attorney in Evanston with a very specific kind of patience for exactly this kind of story. Priya listened to all of it without interrupting. Then she said they cleaned it up. Yes. Do you have anything they didn't get to? No witnesses willing to talk. Everyone's scared, Priya. He's the name on everything. Not the name I care about, Priya said. Who actually owns the building? Amara stopped. She had never separated those two things in her mind. Elliot was the face, the reputation, the brand. But the property, the entity that signed the lease, the money underneath the Michelin stars, that was a different question entirely. I don't know, Amara said. Then find out, because the person who owns the building always has more reach than the person who cooks in it. And if those are different people, that gap is your leverage. What Amara didn't know was that the answer to that question ate dinner 6 nights a week in her corner booth and watched her the way someone watches a thing they are quietly, carefully deciding to protect. 4 days later, Elliot escalated. He moved Amara from dinner service to lunch, cutting her earnings by more than a third. He redistributed her best servers under a pretense of team rotation. He began forwarding emails to the parent company, flagging inventory discrepancies that didn't exist in any record she could find, creating a slow, clean paper trail that painted her as careless and unreliable. He wasn't firing her. Firing her would validate her complaint and invite scrutiny. Instead, he was manufacturing a version of her that made quitting look like the only reasonable choice. A resignation reads better than a termination after an allegation. Amara recognized the playbook. She had watched it run on other women. The institutional slow fade, where a competent person is incrementally reframed as a problem until they disappear and everyone says it was their own decision. She didn't resign. She documented. Every schedule change, every reassignment, every forwarded email timestamped, screenshotted, saved in 3 separate cloud locations. She showed up to every shift on time, in full, unreadable. She gave the building her best work and gave Elliot nothing he could use. What she didn't know was that everything he was doing was being watched and cataloged by someone with considerably more resources than a corporate HR department. They buried the footage, turned the witnesses, cut her hours, and are building a false record to erase her, and she is still standing. If you've ever had to keep showing up to a place that was quietly trying to swallow you whole, this story exists for you. Like this video. Not for the algorithm. For Amara. Because stories like hers only reach the people who need them if you decide they deserve to travel. 3 weeks after the incident, Amara was the last one out of the building on a Friday night. She locked the back entrance at 12:15, crossed the staff lot to her car, and noticed a black SUV parked on the service road parallel to the lot. Engine off. No plates visible from where she stood. The faintest glow of a phone screen behind tinted glass. Gary, Indiana, had taught her something about parking lots at midnight. She gripped her keys, walked to her car with purpose, drove home checking her mirrors more times than she counted. The next morning, something was on her building's front step. A small padded envelope. No label, no return address. Inside, a USB drive and a card. Plain white handwritten. The security footage from March 4th was not lost. It was copied before the deletion occurred. The drive contains the original footage, uncut, with intact metadata and timestamp verification. Below that, in the same handwriting, "You are not handling this alone." Amara sat on her hallway floor with the drive in both hands. Someone had accessed a commercial security system belonging to a well-resourced hospitality corporation, extracted footage that the same corporation's IT team had officially declared unrecoverable, and left it on her doorstep. This was either the most extraordinary act of anonymous generosity she'd ever encountered, or the opening move in something whose edges she couldn't yet see. She plugged in the drive, pressed play. 41 seconds of crystal-clear footage. Elliot's hand around her wrist, the turn of her body, the frozen faces of every witness in the frame. She watched it twice. Then she sat with it in silence for a very long time. Then she cried, and it wasn't grief. It was the specific, overwhelming relief of a woman who has been told by every institution around her that what she knows happened didn't happen, suddenly holding proof that she was right about her own life. Her phone rang. Unknown number. She answered. Ms. Amara. The voice was even low and carried just enough of an accent to tell her something about its origin without giving her the full picture. I trust the package arrived safely. Who is this? She asked. Someone who was in the restaurant that evening. She thought immediately of the corner booth. The still man with the flat hands and the scotch he barely drank. The footage, she said carefully. How did you obtain it? He was quiet for a moment. That isn't the important thing. The important thing is that whoever erased it believed they'd been thorough. They weren't. What do you want? She asked. Another pause, the kind that costs something. There's an attorney named Grace Yu. Her practice is in the loop. Tell her Park Jin-soo referred you. She'll take the case. And if I choose not to, then the drive is still yours. Use it how you choose or don't use it at all. That decision belongs entirely to you. Everything from here belongs to you. He ended the call. Amara stared at her phone. Then, inexplicably, she laughed, short and sharp and completely genuine, because a stranger had just returned her proof, connected her with legal representation she couldn't have afforded, and declined to ask for a single thing in exchange. Either this man was the most dangerous person she'd ever encountered, or the most honest one she'd ever met. The suspicion that he was both settled over her like weather. She searched the name, Park Jin-soo. The surface results were sparse and deliberate feeling. A philanthropic foundation. Board seats at 2 infrastructure companies. One photograph that looked like it had been approved by a committee. Below that, the absence of him, no interviews, no social presence, no candid images for a man who apparently frequented Chicago's most visible dining rooms multiple nights a week. She dug deeper. Property records. Court filings. An archived piece from a business journal, 4 years old. A redevelopment project in Bridgeport that had stalled for 6 years under 3 different developers, suddenly clearing all its permitting obstacles within a single quarter. One name appeared adjacent to it, and only once, never in an official capacity. Park Jin-soo, described in a single line as a facilitator known in certain circles as the architect, not because he built things from scratch, but because he looked at broken structures and quietly redesigned them into something that worked. The man who sent her a lawyer was the most powerful connected figure operating in the Midwest's gray economy. Her hands were not steady when she dialed Grace Yu's number, but she dialed. Yu was exactly her reputation. Compact, Korean-American, mid-50s, reading glasses on a chain she used like punctuation. She watched the footage once, set down her pen, and said, "We don't just win this case. We build it so loud it becomes a reference case for the next decade." The lawsuit arrived on Elliot Marsh's desk like a diagnosis. Physical assault, hostile work environment, targeted retaliation, deliberate evidence suppression. Exhibit A, 41 seconds of footage, the corporation had officially declared non-existent. Elliot didn't fold. Men like Elliot do not fold, they counterattack. He retained a private investigator to excavate Amara's background, looking for anything that could be painted as instability or agenda. The investigator made 4 preliminary inquiries before receiving a visit from 2 men who explained, with great courtesy, that the engagement he'd accepted was not in his professional interest or his personal one. The investigator returned his retainer by end of business that day. Amara knew none of this. She was doing what she had always done, showing up, documenting, staying legible. What she did notice was that the infrastructure around Elliot began to quietly crumble. A supplier he'd used for a decade didn't renew their agreement. His most senior sous chef accepted a position in New York without a counteroffer being made. The landlord's office sent notice that lease renewal discussions would not be moving forward. Small things, unremarkable individually, but she could feel the shape of an architecture being disassembled from somewhere she couldn't see, one component at a time, carefully enough that by the time the sky was fully open above him, Elliot wouldn't know how long he'd been exposed. She saw Jin-soo again in person at Grace Yu's office on a Wednesday. He was standing at the window when she arrived, that particular way certain men stand at windows, like the view is a responsibility. He turned when she walked in, and something in his posture adjusted before his face did. a reflex that arrived before the calculation could. "Ms. Amara," he said, the same voice as the phone, controlled with the roughness of something that had decided long ago to stay underneath the surface. "Mr. Park," she said. He indicated the chair beside him. She chose the one on the opposite side of the table. Something crossed his expression that she suspected, if she knew him better, she'd identify as appreciation. "Elliot retained an investigator," you said, setting down pleasantries entirely. "He was looking into your personal history." Amara said. "He's no longer working the engagement." Amara looked at Jinsu. He held her gaze with a specific kind of steadiness. "You handled that," she said, not a question. He considered for a moment. The investigator encountered a clearer understanding of the situation and made a decision accordingly. I helped him understand it. The precision of that answer. The absolute geometric precision of his willingness to tell her exactly what he was without performing any shame about it, and without asking her to pretend otherwise. "If they connect the footage to you," she said, "what happens then?" "They won't. And if they do?" The pause had weight. "Then I have a conversation with their legal team that resolves differently than they'd anticipated." That isn't really an answer. It's the only answer I can give you that doesn't make this room more complicated than it needs to be right now. She felt it then, the current that had been building since a man set down a glass of scotch and went still in a restaurant corner the night something awful happened to her. She looked at the harbor through the glass instead of at him, because looking at him for too long had started to feel like standing near an open fire in January. You notice it, and then you stop wanting to leave. "I have one question," she said, "and I need you to answer it without calculating how to frame it." He nodded once. "Why me?" "Specifically, you've been in rooms where terrible things happen to people. I suspect more than most. Why did you get involved in mine?" The room registered the question physically. You picked up a folder and quietly relocated herself to the far end of the table. Jinsu's jaw shifted, a small, precise movement she'd learned to read as the moment he was choosing honesty over strategy. "I have seen people treated badly many times," he said. "Most of the time, I feel very little about it. That is not something I am proud of. It is simply true. That night, watching what Elliot did, something happened that I do not have the right word for." He looked at her directly, with no management of what he was conveying. "You are the first thing that has gotten through in a very long time, and it hasn't stopped." He just told you he's spent years feeling nothing, and she broke through without a single word directed at him. A man who controls things cities don't even know they've handed him, and she walked into a room and changed the temperature. If that found something in your chest, then you already understand what Tailies by Wave is for. We don't make content. We make mirrors. Subscribe. Not because I'm asking. Because the moment she learns why he was really in that restaurant is the moment this entire story becomes something else. She didn't respond to what he said that afternoon. She nodded. She returned her attention to the paperwork. She finished the meeting like a professional. But on the expressway going home, she held the steering wheel too hard, and her knuckles ached, and she let herself feel the size of the thing she was being very careful not to feel. She was not the kind of woman who fell into complicated men. She was the kind of woman who built her safety with her own hands, who had understood from a very young age that no one was arriving to rescue her, and that understanding had never once let her down. And here was a man who hadn't tried to rescue her, who had given her the tools and stood back, who cleared obstacles while leaving her the visible authority, who operated in the dark specifically so she could move in the light. It was the most sophisticated thing anyone had ever done for her. It was also the most frightening. Over the following 2 weeks, the case gathered momentum. Grace Yu located 2 former Caldwell and Thorne employees, both women, both separated from the restaurant under circumstances that formed a pattern when placed side by side. Elliot didn't just mistreat people. He systematically dismantled anyone who created inconvenient friction, used the institution to mute them, and let time make them look like they'd simply chosen to move on. Amara read their statements at midnight. Her eyes burned in a way that had nothing to do with Elliot, and everything to do with the years. They'd carried this before anyone with enough standing had cared to look. Her phone buzzed. She'd started to recognize his rhythm: spare, purposeful, never performative. The depositions from the 2 additional witnesses are very strong. You says the timeline looks like 3 weeks. She typed back, "How do you have updates before I do?" He answered, "I pay attention to what concerns you." A pause. Then, "To you, 3 words. They arrived in the part of her she kept locked and turned the key without asking permission. She typed, "That's either the most comforting or the most alarming thing anyone has ever texted me." His response, "I'm aware that it's both." She stayed with those words for a long time. The fracture came on a Thursday afternoon, sitting in Grace Yu's office with deposition transcripts open across the table, when Yu set down her pen and looked at her with the specific softness that precedes a difficult truth. "There's something about Jinsu that you need to know," she said. "Something about the night of March 4th. Amara felt something drop in her stomach. He didn't choose that restaurant casually. Yu measured her words. He's been going to that location once a year for 11 years. Same week, same table. Why, Amara said, though some part of her already understood that she was about to be handed something heavy. Yu's voice dropped. His mother worked there. Not at Caldwell and Thorne. Before that, when the space was a different restaurant entirely, a small neighborhood bistro called the Copper House. She'd immigrated 2 years prior, working double shifts, no documentation, no safety net, sending money home to Seoul for her son's school fees. The owner at the time treated her the way Elliot treated you. Grabbed her, humiliated her in front of the kitchen staff, made her feel like her body was part of the building's inventory. She never reported it. She had no standing to report it. No language, no papers, no one in this country who could receive her account. Amara's hands went flat on the table. She worked there 2 more years and saved enough to bring Jinsu over. He was 12 when he arrived. She was diagnosed with cancer from occupational exposure when he was 14. She died when he was 16. Yu paused. Everything he built after that, every company, every connection, every dollar. Every favor, he built so that the thing that happened to her could never happen again to anyone standing near him. He returns to that location every year because November is the month she died. He sits in the corner, and he orders a meal she would never have been permitted to afford, and he remembers her. And this year, sitting in that restaurant, remembering a woman who had her dignity taken from her inside those walls, he watched Elliot Marsh put his hands on you. Amara couldn't breathe at a manageable rate. Yu's voice was very quiet. He didn't intervene because of how he feels about you, Amara. He intervened because he was sitting in that building remembering his mother, and he watched it happen again in the same space, to a woman who carried herself the way his mother should have been allowed to. The attraction, and it's real. I've known this man for over a decade, and I have not seen him behave the way he behaves when your name enters a conversation. That came after. But you deserve to know where the beginning was. She didn't contact him for 11 days. 11 days of sitting with the question, was any of it actually about her, or was she standing in the light of a woman she'd never met, receiving care that had been accumulating for 16 years looking for somewhere to land? Her friend Dana came over with wine, and the truth Amara didn't want but needed. Both things can be real at the same time, Dana said. He can be there because of her and also be genuinely in it because of you. Grief and feeling aren't competitors. On the 12th morning, Amara drove to the old Caldwell and Thorne building. The restaurant was dark. Elliot's lease had not been renewed by a landlord who, it turned out, had sold the property 3 years ago to a holding company that nobody at the restaurant had ever thought to trace. She went around to the service entrance. The kitchen door was unlocked. He was inside, standing in the empty kitchen without the suit, without the architecture of his public presence, just standing in the dark in a space that used to mean something. He turned when she came in, and his face was unguarded in a way she hadn't seen before. "You should have told me," she said. "Yes. Why didn't you?" "Because I was afraid that if you knew it started with her, you would decide it was only ever about her." He moved closer. His voice lost some of its control. "My mother never had anyone beside her. I was 12 years old and I watched through a crack in the kitchen door while a man humiliated her, and she just kept working because what else could she do?" He stopped. "When I saw Elliot do that to you, Amara, I didn't see her. I saw what she could have been, if someone had stood beside her." She crossed the kitchen, took his hands in hers. "I am not staying because of what you carry for her," she said. "I'm staying because of who you are. Separate from that, I need you to hear the difference." "I know," he said. "See me." She said it steady. Not a correction, me. He looked at her, every defense he owned set aside. "I see you," he said. "I have seen you since the moment you reached down and picked up that pen." He earned what came next. Not with one gesture, but with the accumulation of small, deliberate ones. A security detail she was unaware of for 4 weeks until Dana spotted the same car parked outside 3 separate locations and pointed it out. A first edition cookbook she'd mentioned once, in passing, in a conversation she was surprised he'd retained. The fact that on the morning the trial started, she came out of the courthouse elevator and he was standing on the front steps, not to escort her, not to perform anything, just visible, in case the institution tried to diminish her again, and she needed to know that someone who could move things was paying attention. He earned it by asking questions and waiting for real answers. By not flinching when she pushed back on his decisions, which she did regularly and without apology. By learning, slowly and out loud, that shielding someone and controlling them are not the same act, and choosing only the former every time the choice was available. The verdict came on a Tuesday. Elliot Marsh, liable on all counts. The settlement was significant. The terms were sealed. The 41 seconds of footage aired on 3 national broadcasts. 2 board members of the parent hospitality group resigned within 6 weeks. The other women Yu had found gave interviews that opened a decade of silence into public air. Amara sat at the plaintiff's table with her hands flat on the surface, and her face completely composed, and Priya's hand on her shoulder hard enough to anchor something. It wasn't everything. One case doesn't repair the system that made the case necessary, but it was documented, it was public, it was hers. It was in a coffee shop across the street when she walked out. She crossed 4 lanes of Gold Coast traffic to reach him. "You did it," he said. "We did it," she said. "Don't be understated. It's the least interesting thing about you." Something moved across his face, warm and startled and quickly managed, like happiness was a room he hadn't been in for a long time and he'd momentarily forgotten what it felt like to stand in it. "Dinner," she said. "Not a thank you. Something I want." He was quiet. Then, yes. 6 months later, Amara stood in the kitchen of a restaurant that used to be called Caldwell and Thorne. It had a new name now, Marrow, because marrow is what's inside, the part that can't be taken even when everything on the surface has been stripped away, the part that keeps generating what you need to stay alive. She was executive chef and proprietor, not because any powerful man gave it to her. Because Yu's settlement had included a clause Amara wrote herself, first right of refusal on the lease for the Gold Coast property. She spent 5 months writing a business plan, building an investor group, and designing a menu that was made entirely of recipes she'd developed across every kitchen where someone had tried to make her feel small. Opening night, every table full. Priya managing the floor. Dana at the bar personally narrating the tasting menu to anyone willing to listen. Amara's mother at the window table, texturing a plate of jollof with one hand and wiping her eyes with the other and insisting to the server that the seasoning needed something. Jinsu in the corner. Same booth, same scotch, same stillness, but something in it had changed. The stillness was no longer vigilance. It was something quieter. Something that looked like a man who had finally, after a very long time, arrived somewhere. After service, when the kitchen was clean and the last of the staff had gone home, and the room held the particular warm silence of a space that has spent a whole evening holding people's joy, Amara sat across from him. "Your mother," she said. "This was her kitchen, yes, and now it's mine, yes." She reached across the table and took his hands in both of hers. The hands that had done things in the dark she didn't ask about and never would. The hands that had held hers when they did, like care was the only appropriate application of force. "I'm going to make this a place where no one comes through that door and has to disappear to survive it. You understand that? I'm counting on it." She traced her thumb across his knuckles. "You know this is not uncomplicated," she said. "What you are, what we are, I know," he said. "I'm not asking you to look away. I don't want to," she said. "Then stay," he said, like it was the simplest true thing he'd ever said, and pressed his lips against her knuckles, brief and certain. "I'm not going anywhere." Outside, the Gold Coast held its late winter stillness. Inside, 2 cups of tea sat on the pass, one plain, one with honey, still warm. Like the building itself had been waiting for someone to use the kitchen the way it was always supposed to be used. If this story landed somewhere real in you, a memory, a moment when someone made you invisible and you chose to remain anyway, a time you had to keep walking back into a room that was trying to erase you, then you know why Afro-Korean Tailies Hub exists. We don't produce content. We hold up mirrors. Stories like Amara's survive only if people like you refuse to let them disappear. Subscribe, share this, send it to the person who needs to hear that their dignity was never Elliot Marsh's to touch. Not for me. For every woman who kept working after someone decided her silence was included in her job description. But what Amara didn't know that night, what she wouldn't discover for another 3 weeks, was that Elliot Marsh had not quietly accepted what had happened to him. He'd been making phone calls from a borrowed phone to numbers he'd kept insulated from everything on record. And one of those numbers belonged to a man in London who had been watching Park Jin-soo's operations for 7 years, waiting for something he could use. Not as a business adversary, as someone with an older debt and a much longer memory, and he had just booked his flight.